Hey everybody, we're taking a brief hiatus or break from the PD Mythbust series that we've been doing recently. This time I'm presenting to you a candid conversation between myself and a gentleman who is a person with Parkinson's disease named Ian Robertson. You may recall Ian from our PD Mythbust series video on Parkinson's disease being fatal. He gave his opinion on whether Parkinson's disease diagnosis was a death sentence. He had some interesting words to say about that, if you'll remember.
Is Parkinson's a death sentence? No, birth was a death sentence.
No, birth was a death sentence.
As soon as I was born, I was that much closer to death. Who knows what I'm going to die from?
Anyway, in this conversation, we talked about Ian's take on use of eye movements and focus of vision to enhance exercises, particularly exercises such as LSVT Big. Ian has grown up playing sports, particularly hockey, being from Canada, of course. He graciously spent about 30 minutes with me discussing this topic, and we kind of go off from there, but basically that's the number one focus of the topic that we discussed was using visual focus to enhance exercise. We also talked about other things with exercise. We talked about LSVT Big quite a bit, and I think you'll enjoy this conversation. At least I hope you will. Please stick around until the end of the video. I will meet you at the end after the interview, and I'll conclude the video with you. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos. We're going to be doing more conversations like this, as I said before. But for now, go ahead and listen to our conversation between myself and Ian. Let's roll. So with regard to the eyesight thing, you were telling me that you do some LSVT Big exercise and some other exercises in addition to that. But what was intriguing to me was you brought up the point of really using focus and visual focus, kind of based on sports training that you've received in the past. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. And like I do, you have a history in sports. Like we've coached high-end ice hockey goalies for SAS Hockey and Hockey Canada. And I found I found the stuff that we did off ice with our goalies, the mental stuff was very important. It helped me with my Parkinson's, and all the on ice stuff was a visual attachments, using your voice and all that was really beneficial to me as well. Like it's been actually a godsend that I had 25 plus years in coaching high level goalies. It's been really beneficial.
Well, yeah, and that predisposed you well to the physical activity that you really need as a person with Parkinson's to live your best life with the disease process, with that physical exercise and activity. And I guess, I don't know if I adequately introduced that well either, because basically from our conversations prior to this, from what I remember, it was kind of putting it together with not just with vision, but hand-eye coordination and other aspects of that.
Yeah, I've been doing little daily blurbs, videotaping myself, and it was just sort of in a confined area, which maybe I was bouncing the ball, catching the ball, and so I was trying to show that it's causing me to make lots of turns, connections to catching the ball, bouncing the ball, using my voice while I was talking, and there's music in the background, and so keeping a beat there. Just trying to combine these sort of as many facets of what we use to move in about 3 or 4 minutes.
I really enjoyed seeing the videos you're posting in not only my Facebook group, but in other locations on Facebook, because I do like the positivity of the videos that you're posting. And also I love that you're sharing what you're doing so that other people are inspired by that. So I appreciate you sharing those things. And I've known you, I don't know you really well individually, but I know you well enough based on the support groups I've been to that that's your personality is a very positive one in the face of what would be a grave thing for a lot of people to face on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think I've sort of always had that. Like even when I got diagnosed, that came out immediately, and I had no repercussions on it. And it's been. I wish I never had Parkinson's, but it's been a bit of an eye opener to get out and meet new people and move around. And it's something I like to talk about. Sometimes so much that getting me to shut up about it is probably more of a problem.
That's okay though. I think that you have a lot to say, and it's not just fluff, So that's a good thing. But one thing that we were talking about a few minutes ago that was intriguing to me was you had mentioned LSVT. I didn't realize before you had done the program or were incorporating that into your routine. So that's good to hear because there's a lot of programs and protocols out there, and that being one of the prominent ones. But I love what we're talking about in terms of essentially using the vision and focus to make those exercises even more enhanced. One example you gave a few minutes ago when we were talking about this before we recorded, I think it was I believe it was the sit and reach exercise, wasn't it? Where you're doing yeah. So Ian had suggested instead of one thing I've had people focus on is the hand, but I love your idea of actually focusing beyond the hand, let's say to an imaginary object or some focal point on the wall, for example, as a way to reach even further. Is that the way you described it?
Yeah, like in my garage, there might be, say, a picture on the wall. That's what I'm reaching for. And
right.
I'll pass my arm, pass my hand at that picture, and then I'll refocus. I'll make a fist, and it brings my eyes back to my fist. So I've got depth perception, and then I'll open up my fist, looking beyond it again, and I'll bring it back.
Right. Yeah. So you're because obviously we're encouraging that big hand during the exercise, but then you're using that reach to kind of almost like you're pulling that object toward you. Yeah, I love that idea. Actually, that's really cool. Because obviously we're sustaining that big movement as long as we can, but at the end of your 10 count, you could pull it back, right?
Yeah.
For example, and then you have that big finish at the end.
You watch it finish.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, I have had people do that where I'm having them look at the thigh as they slap, or maybe I don't know if I've cued it directly that way, but what the funny thing that can happen sometimes, and you may have experienced this when you did a program, is at first you might miss the thigh when you're trying to come back and do that slap.
Yeah.
I know I have patients do that all the time where they're like, oh, I missed it. Let me try it again.
Yeah, and then, of course, that'll vary on their ability to do the movement too.
Sure.
But to me, if we make the visual attachment, it makes it just a little bit more powerful because you're moving everything in there.
Yeah.
So this here, you get as much body rotation as if I get.
No, I really think that's a great idea. I think there's a value in both as far as with that big finish. Looking is great for that visual feedback, and you're getting that intensity and drive, but I can see it being valuable too for the because Parkinson's affects our ability as a human to feel what the movement feels like, or the normal movement feels like, and so, or even position in space can be hard to tell where you're at, and so I think it's valuable to see that finish, that slap happen, but I also think it's valuable too to not look at times to get the accuracy. Like my hands are going exactly where I want them to be, right?
Well, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself here, Michael, but we called it in our goalie room the 4 P's of practice, and the P's are: we want to have a purpose, like understand why you're doing the drill, so that's your purpose. And you want to have precision, so you want to be as as efficient as possible when moving to that target, focusing on that target. You want to add power, because that's got to be the big part,
Yes.
Yeah. And then you want to have patience, because we may not be able to do it all at once, but over time we'll develop that. So the 4 Ps for us in practice are have a purpose, practice with power, practice with being precise, and be patient with it. And then it's sort of a mathematical formula, those 4 Ps add up and equal passion. And so you're doing something that you love to do. Once you understand it, the more you understand it, the more passionate you can get about it. Is how I do it.
No, I think that's a great truth, really. And as a physiotherapist, I've been a firm believer in explaining why we do things to my patients. And there's a lot of different personalities in the therapy world. There are some PTs that are just like, just do it my way because that's the way I told you to do it. But my personality type is to educate. And so I agree wholeheartedly with that 4 Ps mentality of understanding the purpose, first of all. And that is very important. LSVT Vega, if you're talking about a specific program, there's a lot to take in with that for a person with Parkinson's or for anybody that's doing it for the first time. And so understanding the reasons behind the exercises or any exercise you're doing for any particular purpose, whether it's for Parkinson's or otherwise, is important to understand the rationale. And that will get you, as you said, on board with becoming passionate about it, which I think is crucial.
I think it's the way I look at my Parkinson's and how I so-called exercise it. And I came across, doing these videos I've been doing, I've changed my whole perspective about Parkinson's and exercise. Is that, and maybe it's because I come from maybe a sports background, but I don't consider it exercise. I consider it practice, because I'm in a competition.
That's fair.
Against Parkinson's, and we're fighting for possession of one object, and that's me. And so I want to practice as possible, and as precise as possible, and powerful as possible, so that I can try and beat this combatant that I'm fighting for my possession. If that makes sense to you.
Oh, that makes perfect sense, and it kind of feeds into that it's almost a trite saying, but you could kind of call it a motivational saying of like, I have PD, but it doesn't have me. But in that case, if you take it even further into a sports metaphor, it's like, hey, this thing does not have possession of me.
Well, we're fighting for it, and I realize that I'm probably going to lose this fight eventually, but we're gonna fight and play into a few over.
Absolutely. And there's so much hope for people. I mean, you're going to be able to, with what you're doing now, you're in an amazing position to really resist the negative changes as long as possible. And that's the main thing.
Like I realize that as every day progresses, I get a little bit older, it gets a little bit stronger. And so the fight, the will to fight is back a little bit, but I want to try and make it as small as possible.
That's great. But something we talked about a little bit ago that I wanted to reiterate on the episode is you had asked a question about essentially it wasn't necessarily due to aging, but aging could be a complication of being fatigued, and whether it's really worth it to really kind of push into that exercise when you're already getting to that point of fatigue. I don't know if I'm wording it exactly the way you did, but I think what you had asked is essentially, could you incorporate it into your routine in such a way that you can break it up? I think that's what your question was.
Well, is that going to an exercise class? I don't know how other people with Parkinson's are feeling, but sometimes I can go from an on to an off, just boom. Like I could be at a restaurant, I'll be eating my meal, cutting my meat, and 2 seconds later I can't even lift my fork to my mouth. And so I want to go to the exercises, but sometimes they can be extended beyond what my on and off times will permit me to have. And so I figure if I can get the information of why I'm doing it, how I'm supposed to do it, then maybe when I'm at home and I have an on moment where I have some time, free time, I can do that exercise for, maybe with 10 reps or something. Not a lot, but it gets me doing it. And I can do that 10 reps maybe 4 or 5 times a day, depending on my day goes.
Yeah, I see your point. Certainly during on times is your optimal time to do anything. And so I would say, yeah, if you have opportunity throughout the day, you or anybody that's listening, if you have the opportunity throughout the day to do small chunks of exercise, that's valuable, and it could be very helpful and could prepare you for the off times potentially.
Yeah, the more I can do it during the off time during the day, that will eventually, one of the keys is to develop patience. Is that it gives me the time to build up my stamina that maybe I can do it longer.
Sure, and I'll remind the audience and you that, I mean, even though it's not as much as your carbidopa, levodopa, or whatever form of dopamine or dopamine agonist potentially that you're taking, exercise in and of itself, especially intensely, is going to give you some natural dopamine.
Yeah.
So it's not as high as a medication dose, but it can be helpful for the off times as well. So
yeah, I find it actually can extend my on times when I'm at
yes,
the exercise.
precisely. So, but I love the question because it does bring up a point of, should it be in a larger chunk of time, 30 to 45 minutes, doing it very intensely, and then you're done, versus breaking it down throughout the day. I think there's value in both, but I do love the suggestion, the idea of doing small chunks, because we all can, not just, it could be any kind of exercise, but specifically with the Parkinson's specific things that can be really helpful. There's always opportunities to be able to incorporate. So, for example, I think earlier you had mentioned big steps or walking. That's something you can do in the home. You can incorporate. You could just choose at some point to do 5 sit to stands with a big reach. You could do. You could break up the exercises from LSVT Big, for example. You could break it out. Instead of doing all 7 exercises, you could do 2 at a time or something. Or you could reduce the reps. Typically on the home versions, we're doing 4 reps of the main 5, the first 5. So, first thing in the morning, you could do 4 of each of the seated exercises at the edge of the bed. Or at some point before getting up later, if you're already up and about the house, you could do some of the standing exercises. You're waiting at the microwave or something, you could, do a few big step and reaches. Sorry, my camera angle is terrible here, but you get my point. I mean, there's ways to incorporate it.
The reason I asked that question was because of again one of the P's I want to try and follow is being precise, to make the movement as precise as possible. And the more I get tired, the less stamina I have, the less precision I have in that movement. And it's the old adage, you hear people say practice makes perfect, and that's not right. Practicing something wrong does not make you any better. You want to practice perfect to be perfect. And so you want to make sure you're focused on every little detail you can when you can do that exercise. It's sort of what I'm trying to get at. That's
a good reminder, though, because you're right. That's truth. That you practicing imperfectly is not going to improve. Is not going to get you perfection for sure.
So you get perfect at doing it wrong, I guess.
Exactly. Perfectly imperfect. Yeah, I love it. One other thing that I remembered from our earlier piece was using the vision as a feedback mechanism as well. So I think the example you gave was during the seated exercise, focusing forward so that you can see your peripheral vision. That's valuable because if you're not reaching back far, we're still using these same exercises as examples, but I think it's pertinent. If you're doing the floor to ceiling exercise, where the first part you're sitting with big posture reaching back, this is the final part of the exercise where you're holding it. If you're not far enough back, your posture isn't big and your arms aren't reaching back, they might be more forward. So with your peripheral vision, you might be able to detect, oh no, I need to move back further because I can still see my thumbs or my hands.
Yeah.
So
anything, to me, anytime we can utilize our vision with our motion, our movement, that helps us with our balance. And if that helps us with our balance, then we don't fall as much. Because the more we can incorporate our vision, it seems weird, but the information sort of gets sent to our ears, and it creates this better balance.
Well, the ears and the eyes are they're connected directly in terms of our balance mechanism. So that's extremely important to remember. And so you're absolutely 100% right to point that out. And that's something, again, that in the 4 Ps, we don't always hear the purpose. One of the things that I do encourage folks to do with the LSVT, you're familiar with the rock and reach exercise. That's my patients call it the rock and roll and the twist and shout. But you get the standing, sorry, I just hit the wall, standing twist. And you can use vision in that one directly. And I often encourage patients to look at the outside hand, basically the hand that you're reaching across with. And I have my patients follow that hand with their eyes so that so I take it back. It's this hand. I'm having them follow this hand around. So that they're basically keeping the focus on the hand that's rotating back and around so that they can turn their entire head and body that direction. That's just one example, but there could be better ways to cue that, but that's one way I've done it.
We used to do with our goalies in our hockey schools that we want to try and limit our visual resets. So if I'm moving, if I'm looking at a plane, I want my eyes to move like this. Keep my head still. If I go up and down, my eyes are limited in the movement. So the example we use is that if you were to read this letter, is it easier to read it in a non-tremor hand or in my tremor hand? And so, And so if I'm moving my eyes, when I'm moving, I'm giving my body less information on how to move. And so giving it less visual input. So when we move, we want to try and limit our visual resets. So if I'm reaching across, I want to have my eyes almost at the same height all the time, as opposed to going up and down. There are times for that. But the more we throw a different visual reset in, the harder it is for our brain to pick up the cues that the eyes are trying to send us.
Right. Well, and there's like you said, there's a time and place for that, because I think that another example, this is not part of LSVT, but there are some movement patterns we all do as humans. There's upper and lower body patterns, but there are so-called PNF movement patterns. So there's diagonals, in other words, that we move through with the upper body and the lower body. With the upper body, we have 2 diagonals. So there's the diagonal 1, like this, and the diagonal 2, which is like this. And we can incorporate the whole body into that movement. We can move the arm independently in that diagonal. But if we're functionally moving, we're probably going to be going through that angle with the trunk. So one exercise I've done with folks, and I've done this on my online classes too at times, is I have people stand with their feet apart, because it can be a little bit, if you put your feet close together, it's a balance challenge, but I just have people stand with their feet shoulder width apart. have the eyes focused on the palm of the hand or maybe the fingertips, and then follow. I don't know if that's too much visual input, but that's kind of just to kind of have the hand-eye coordination piece, incorporating the head movement with the eye, with the stabilization of the gaze.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
With us, and I'm a bad example now because with the tremors you have and the dyskinesia I have, it's kind of hard for me to keep that visual thing. But
that's true. It depends.
It's still something for me to strive for and try to achieve. And in all honesty, having done it for like 20 some years, it still comes relatively easy to me once I get moving or find something that triggers me to move. Easier.
You do bring up a good point there. If you have a limb that is in abnormal movement patterns, that does make it difficult to focus on your your vision on that limb. So, but that is something that still could be worth trying to focus on. But that would make it more difficult for sure. So I think there's value in what you're talking about, though, in trying to keep your visual changes at a minimum, talking planes of motion versus up and down, that kind of thing. So definitely more could be done to make that a part of exercise programs and routines. And I'd kind of like to see more research on that too. Yeah. Also, in the future.
What we did with our goalies is that it's a lot easier. And it's sort of like if you're going to catch a baseball or whatever, it's a lot easier if you can sort of centrally locate your body so you're square to it all the time. So if I'm going to reach for something, I'm square to it. And so that leads with our visions. Like we always say in our goalie schools or coaches clinics, we'll go, what's the most important physical attribute we use to move and have success goaltender? And they'll think, oh, you got to have power, you got to be able to do this. So no, these things tell you where to go, how to get there, and what to do once you get there. They start that whole procedure. And so if we don't use them correctly, then we're behind. We're not giving the body the problems in the right order, which will cause us to fall or stumble or trip. And that's my interpretation of it. And that's why I reached out to you, because I'm no scientist, I'm no doctor, I'm just the coach.
But there's value in that, so I appreciate you reaching out and offering your input on that too. It's important to hear about these experiences because obviously coming from the background that you do, that offers input and insight into things that a lot of people aren't thinking of, including myself even. And so I appreciate that, and I appreciate you bringing that to my attention as well as to others, just so that they can start thinking about incorporating these kind of things into their exercises or their routines, because it may be helping them in a way that they aren't being helped already.
Well, what I've noticed with a lot of Parkies or fellow people with Parkinson's is that they don't question a lot of things.
True.
And I think if you want to live with this disease and be comfortable with it, and I don't mean you want to accept it by any stretch of imagination, but you got to be comfortable with it. The more you learn about it, the more you can learn how to do things to live more comfortable with it. And it's really how you think, how you see, what you talk, all have a powerful way of helping you fight this disease.
Yeah, absolutely. What's one thing that, as a newly diagnosed person with Parkinson's back in 2012, I don't know if I should say one thing, but what is something that you wish you had known then that you know now, or something that you wish somebody had told you then?
I think the only thing that I have, listening to other people, I've been really blessed. I got diagnosed fairly quickly, The doctor I went to was great at communicating it. I think the only thing I would change is when I first got diagnosed, I was a little cocky because I was fairly active. I was coaching hockey. My wife and I ballroom danced. I was taking boxing. We were hiking. I ran. I curled, if you know what curling is, twice a week.
Oh yeah.
And so I was doing physically active pretty much all the time. And really, it was Parkinson's was more just like a nuisance thing. Like I didn't take any medication until 4 years in, because as you were saying, I was fairly active, and exercise does stimulate some dopamine growth.
Right.
And so I didn't really need it. And then COVID hit, and all that went. Boy, did I got a life lesson there that this is a lot worse than I thought it was. And so I think the thing I learned is that I wish I would have handled it a little better, understanding it a little more, I guess, at the start.
So I went ahead and sped up this next section just because we wanted to talk about several other topics that were not necessarily germane to the topic of this video. However, it was worth noting that we discussed important topics such as community in Parkinson's disease and how that can help one's outcome and outlook on the disease. He also reiterated the importance of physical activity and exercise, which of course I agree with wholeheartedly. He also said to focus on self-affirmation and positive thinking, because negative thinking can take you into a spiral, a downward spiral, and ultimately you may give up things that you think Parkinson's is going to take away from you. Ironically, you could have probably kept doing them. And the way he put it was, make Parkinson's prove that it's going to take it away from you before you give it up. One of his things that he said that inspired me was that he says that the way he tackles things is to socialize, to move, and to laugh. And as he put it, one of my favorite sayings that I first heard in PT school was, motion is lotion. And he also used that quote as well, which I hope that's starting to spread, because it's one of my favorite sayings about movement and exercise. But anyway, it was a great conversation. It's worth listening to the entire thing, which you could listen to on the Parkinson's Warrior podcast version of this conversation. I'll leave a link to that in the description. But without further ado, we're going to continue with this conversation, concluding the topic of visual focus and exercise.
Yes. Well, thank you for a great conversation today, and I appreciate you reaching out to talk about it, but also appreciate your willingness to let us record you today so that we can share this with other people. So I appreciate you being here today.
Now, I apologize for vibrating because it's kind of hard to walk. We're talking about vision and staying focused, and I'm going to try to see me now.
That's okay. You're a moving target today. No problem. But I appreciate it, Ian. And I hope I have you back on the show maybe sometime. If not, I'll see you around Facebook on the support group and all that stuff too.
Oh, no problem.
So you have a good day, and we'll talk to you later.
Well,
I certainly hope you enjoyed that conversation between Ian and myself. It certainly was fun to record it, and I look forward to doing more conversations such as these to share with you all. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know by liking it, and I'd love to hear your comments on feedback of what you thought about Ian's approach. Maybe you're doing something similar, maybe you think it's off base, whatever. You know what? Every individual with Parkinson's is a little bit different. Sometimes the approaches may or may not work for every single person, but being proactive is the key. Thanks for watching. Be empowered.